Hi, are you the third judge for this round?
Hi, yes, I'm here.
Okay, yay. You're the replacement because the other one did not show up.
Cool.
Okay, I'm ready to begin if everyone else is.
Could I get just a second to pull up my flow? Thank
Yeah,
you.
yeah.
Hey guys, sorry about that. I had a few technical.
Good to go whenever you guys are.
Okay, just a second. I'm just gonna have some water if that's fine. Okay, I'll just put my time. Okay, if everyone is ready, I'll start my time on the reverse countdown of 3, 2, 1. We affirm resolved outer space colonization is a moral imperative. Definitions: outer space colonization, the establishment of permanent, autonomous, self sufficient human habitation of locations outside Earth. Probes, temporary outposts, and unmanned extraction do not qualify. Colonization means a society, not a claim. Moral imperative, an unconditional requirement of right action binding apart from consequence, convenience, or self interest. It is the categorical imperative in Kant's sense and what Rawls' constructivism models as a standpoint of impartial moral reasoning. The resolution asserts obligation, not permission. The question is not whether colonization would be pleasant, but whether justice requires it. Framework: value, justice. Criterion: maximum under the transgenerational original position. A policy is just if and only if it would be selected by rational parties behind a veil of ignorance who do not know their generation, their social position, or their share of the world's resources. Because the stakes at issue are catastrophic and irreversible, the parties do not average outcomes, they apply maximum, choosing the policy whose worst case outcome is least bad. Link chain: the criterion resolves a value because justice is what impartial parties will accept, and the veil extended across time is the only partial stat point that calculates everyone the resolution affects, including everyone not yet born. Why maximum is the right value? Rawls' own three conditions. Maximum is rational when probabilities cannot be reliably estimated, when there is little to gain above the guaranteed minimum, and when some possible outcome is one a contractor can hardly accept. Extinction satisfies all three, and the original position was never locked to the present. The parties represent family lines, including their descendants, and the just saving principles bind each generation to say what it could rationally expect past generations to have saved for it. That's Rawls' The Theory of Justice, 1971. Rawls also rejects pure time discounting. The claims of future persons do not count less because they are future. The way it extended across generations is not a stretch of Rawls, it is its own machinery. If maximum governs any irreversible catastrophic state, it governs the fate of all future persons. Observation: this is a values round. The resolution is a moral proposition, not a policy fiat. The affirmative proves that colonization is a moral imperative. The mechanisms in this case are illustrative proof that the imperative is actionable, not a plan the negative may counterplan around. To win, the negative must prove the resolution false, not that the same particular colonization program is imperfect. Neither side wins by default. The affirmative must prove the resolution, and the negative must prove it false. Contention 1: redundancy is the only insurance against irreversible loss. A: uniqueness. Every person alive and every person who could ever exist depends on one planet. Supervolcanic eruption, engineered pathogen, nuclear exchange, runaway climate feedback, unaligned AI, all correlated planet-wide risks. Because there is nowhere else to be when they arrive, the status quo's worst case is terminal, and it compounds with every century of inaction. P: probability. Torpedoed places existential catastrophe risks this century at roughly 1 in 6, dominated by anthropogenic causes. Independent scholarship in the Duke Law and Technology Review puts the literature's range at 10 to 25%. Even a critic who thinks these estimates overshoot by a full order of magnitude lands at 1 in 60. Those are not odds a national contractor accepts for a stake with no recovery. C: magnitude and maximum comparison. The parties compare worst cases, not averages. The status quo's worst case is extinction, the permanent foreclosure of roughly 10 raised to the power 16 future lives. A stake so vast it is routinely underweighted. The governed program's worst case is a fixable policy failure. Maximum selects the program, and if the judge rejects maximum in favor of expected value, the magnitude of the stake wins there too. The case survives either metric, so a framework debate cannot bury it. D: internal link. Bunkers, walls, and archives share Earth's gravity while atmosphere and and long run habitability. Every terrestrial hedge ensures against temporary catastrophe, none ensures against a planet rendered permanently uninhabitable, and none does anything against the one risk that is certain rather than probabilistic, the sun's eventual expansion. A genuinely separate, self sufficient settlement is the only hedge that assumes nothing about Earth. That is a difference in kind, not degree. Solvency. Governed and affordable. Hamilton 22 wants our unregulated space development can increase rather than decrease existential risk to identifiable market failures and precise common governance on the Moon Treaty model. This case defends exactly that. Treaty-bound coordinated expansion, not an unregulated scramble under maximum. The comparison that matters is the governed program's downside, which is policy dependent and suppressible against the status quo's downside, which is fixed and total. And none of this requires speculative technology. Launch costs have already fallen 90 to 97% in the structural era, from about $54,500 per kilogram to about $1,500 to $3,000 per kilogram on proven flying hardware. Redundancy is newly affordable now. Contention to a governed world. Contention 2. Justice requires breaking the terrestrial resource trap. The injustice is structural. The problem is not simply that resource extraction can be unpleasant, it is who bears the cost of resource consumption. Roughly 70% of the world's cobalt comes from Democratic Republic of Congo, where artisanal mining has been associated with child labor and fatal accidents. The global economy distributes the benefits of critical minerals broadly while concentrating many extraction harms among vulnerable populations. Behind the veil, you do not know whether you'll be the person consuming the final product. B. Colonization expands humanity's resource frontier. Earth has a finite terrestrial resource base. Every additional unit of scarce material extracted from Earth carries ecological, labor, and geopolitical costs. A generally self-sufficient off-world civilization creates something humanity currently lacks: access to resources outside Earth's fixed ecological and political system. I am not claiming an asteroid magically solves exploitation tomorrow. The claim is that colonization expands the resource frontier, giving humanity the possible of meeting future demand. See, governance prevents us from exporting exploitation into space. This is why our advocacy is not an unregulated corporate scramble. We defend a treaty-bound, non-sovereign commons regime in which extraterrestrial resources are governed for humanity broadly rather than converted into private territorial monopolies. The Outer Space Treaty already establishes outer space as a province of all mankind, and Hamilton 22 develops a common space governance model. D. Phasing prevents the strongest economic objection. The transition must be gradual, offered supply rather than substitute for the most exploitative terrestrial extraction as capacity develops, rather than suddenly flooding markets and destroying mineral export economies. Phasing gives affected economies time to diversify while progressively reducing dependence on exploitative extraction. Why colonization rather than mining alone? Because a departing mining fleet can be captured by whoever controls the launch infrastructure. Permanent human presence creates the institutional foundation for accountability, jurisdiction, representation, and enforcement of the commons regime. This is why our mechanism is colonization rather than mere extraction technology. Lastly, F criterion application. Behind the veil, you do not know whether you will be born as a worker bearing the cost of extraction or as a consumer benefiting from it. Maximum therefore asks us to reduce the vulnerability of the worst off rather than assume we will all be among the beneficiaries. And for these reasons, I strongly urge an affirmative ballot. Thank you.
Okay. If we're ready, I think we can move to Crossfire.
Yeah.
And just a request for future rounds, would it be possible to like slow down when you're saying your value criterion, and not value criterion, but like contentions or like
Yeah.
signposting, since I wasn't able
Yeah.
to catch a few of those.
Okay.
But
I'm
yeah,
sorry.
if we're ready, I can start
Yeah.
when we.
Before we start, in case you need like any clarification or something regarding where I might have gone a bit faster, you can like just get that in cross X if that's fine
Okay.
for you.
Yeah, sure. Okay. So if we'll start, we can start on my first word. So first, you talk about setting up a self-sustaining settlement to survive a catastrophe on Earth, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. How many people would you need to live there for it to meaningfully preserve humanity, as you say yourself?
Sorry, I didn't get your
How-
question.
So you say we'd preserve humanity by making an outer space settlement. How many people would we need in that settlement to meaningfully preserve humanity?
Okay, so I do not have, and like there is no scientifically
Just
established like minimum.
any number. Do you think it needs to be higher than at least a couple million?
I okay again. There is no scientifically established minimum population for a self-sustaining off-world civilization, and estimates vary enormously with
Okay.
depending
Yeah,
on
sure. But
technology.
how many people would you estimate? Would it be in the millions, billions to live? How many people would you need to live there for it to meaningfully preserve humanity? As you say, just a number. Would it be millions?
I do not have an estimate for you right now.
Okay. So let's just assume it's in the millions, since obviously to preserve humanity, you need at least a million people. With the most ever inside a single spacecraft launch at 8 until now, and that was simply exiting Earth's atmosphere. How do you expect to send that many people to an outer space settlement millions of miles away?
Okay. So, firstly, let's talk about the resolution itself. Our resolution is outer space colonization is a moral imperative. We're not
Yeah.
debating policy fiat here. There is, I do not have
Mhm.
to tell you exactly how many people would go,
Okay.
how would we manage that, and
But
everything, because it's a
for it to
moral
be a
document.
for anything to be a moral imperative, there has to be clarity on how the action's happening, how outer space colonization, if it's even possible in the first place. So how can you expect to send that many people?
Again,
How
again,
would we be expected to send that many people?
my value criterion is maximum, which talks about choosing the policy whose worst case outcome is least bad, which is what I have to prove
Okay.
to you during the round. That's not my
Okay.
burden of proof. So
So your burden of proof doesn't mean proving outer space colonization will work. Is that what you're
I
saying?
do not have to prove any implementation strategies
Okay.
or fiat view because it's not a policy debate, it's an LD debate. So
Okay. Uh, okay, we can move forward then. Let's talk about how much of humanity will be left behind. So let's say millions are sent to Earth, right? Or let's say a random number that you cannot justify. What about the people who are left behind on Earth?
again, that is not what the resolution asks us to talk about. The resolution
Okay, but
itself says
in your yeah, if I can just in your framework itself, you justify it by saying future generations are important. So are you saying that your argument doesn't take into consideration what will happen to future generations on Earth?
no,
If
I'm not saying that.
Yeah, because the justification of your framework was future generations are important. So are you
Yeah,
saying so then what is going to happen to those future generations who are left on Earth and aren't the billions, 8.2 or 3 billion that are left on Earth and aren't able to
yeah.
go to space?
Okay, again, as I quoted before earlier, that I'm not denying future people moral status, and like I'm not. I
Okay,
guess that's
sorry to
the
interrupt. I
wrong.
think that's time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it's fine. It's fine. It's fine.
Okay, I'd like to take running prep if that's fine with the judges. Um, I'll start prep time when I mute if that's fine. Yeah. Okay, that's 1 minute and 30 seconds. If we're all ready, I can start with my Nick constructor. 1 second, sorry. All right. Are we all good, judges, debater? All right, sorry. Um, all right. Three, two, one. We cannot protect humanity by preparing for a future in which we abandon the world that sustains it. It is because I agree with this statement that I negate the resolution. To define a few terms, outer space colonization means establishing permanent, self-sustaining human communities beyond Earth. A moral imperative is defined as not merely something beneficial or desirable, but something that is morally necessary. Additionally, the resolution says colonization is a moral imperative, meaning the affirmative must prove that it is a morally necessary obligation under present circumstances. Moving to my framework, I value human welfare and the protection of human well-being and the conditions that allow people to live and flourish. My value criterion is protecting Earth and its inhabitants. This is justified by Aldo Leopold's land ethic, which holds that our actions are morally right when they preserve the integrity and stability of the community that sustains us. Their framework of justice is clearly outweighed both under my Aldo Leopoldi philosophy and on the philosophy that without Earth, there would be nothing to sustain human life, meaning that the protection of Earth outweighs all other frameworks in terms of moral priority. Under my framework, the judge should prefer the side that best protects um, the people living on Earth and preserve the conditions for their continued well-being on Earth. My first contention is outer space colonization undermines our responsibility to protect Earth. Outer space colonization can erode the very incentive that we have to protect humanity on Earth. Astrophysicist Martin Rees warns that when that believing a space colonization offers an escape from the problems faced on Earth is a dangerous delusion. Once humanity begins treating another world as an escape route, the political urgency to protect the world we actually depend upon can weaken. This creates what scholars describe as a disposable planet mentality. If humanity believes that there's somewhere else to go to avoid the problems on our planet, Earth can begin to look less like something we must protect and more like something we can eventually leave behind. Moreover, no matter what AF makes it seem like, an escape route through space colonization is not an escape for humanity. Even under an extremely optimistic scenario, settlements could accommodate only a tiny fraction of Earth's population. The wealthy may eventually have access to an alternative, but billions will remain completely dependent on an Earth that we left vulnerable. So weakening the incentive to protect Earth doesn't make humanity resilient, it leaves the overwhelming majority exposed. We cannot fulfill these obligations by creating an escape for a few while neglecting the planet sustaining everyone else. Judge, a lifeboat for a few does not justify neglecting the ship carrying everyone else. Outer space colonization may be valuable, but that doesn't make abandoning our responsibility to protect Earth a moral imperative. Our second contention, humanity should pursue the least dangerous path to survival. Philosopher Hans Jonas warns that when humanity's actions can create irreversible consequences, we have a duty to exercise caution and avoid unnecessary risk. That matters because colonization is an extremely dangerous and resource-intensive project that AF has not proved as genuinely necessary. It's important to consider that an objective does not establish an obligation. Protecting human life, securing resources, and preparing for a catastrophe do not specifically require leaving Earth. Earth itself contains enormous room for us to pursue those objectives. Hardened underground communities can protect populations from surface catastrophes. Underwater habitats allow humans to develop self-sustaining systems, and isolated infrastructure on Earth can diversify where humans live without requiring us to cross millions of miles in space. Additionally, Nakul Malik argues that establishing a self-sufficient colony would require enormous resources that it could instead address existing problems on Earth. Judge, if a safer path can achieve these obligations without outer space colonization, we have a moral obligation to pursue them first. Outer space colonization is therefore an option, but is nowhere near becoming a moral imperative. Our third contention, outer space colonization creates new human vulnerabilities. Realistically, outer space colonization does not eliminate human vulnerability. It can place human beings in environments where that vulnerability becomes far more severe. Konrad Skoik argues that the human factor is simultaneously the most essential and most vulnerable part of an outer space settlement because humans remain biologically and psychologically poorly suited to extraterrestrial environments. NASA makes the vulnerability even clearer. For planets like Mars, life support systems must be far more reliable than in places like the ISS because emergency resupply and rapid return to Earth will likely be impossible. A failure that would simply be an inconvenience on Earth could therefore wipe out an entire outer space settlement. If the people we send are more vulnerable to catastrophe because they are separated from the systems that sustain life on Earth, then colonization is not protecting humanity from vulnerability. It's transferring that vulnerability onto the people we send. A moral imperative should protect human lives, not put these lives in extremely unsafe settlements for no clear benefits. Now, let's move to their case. First, they talk about existential risks, but all the existential risks that they can identify will follow us as we go to outer space exploration, as we build settlements in outer space. Firstly, artificial intelligence, which is the primary one, it'll be easier to wipe out space settlements because space settlements are significantly more dependent on infrastructure. And in the completely improbable scenario where an existential threat does wipe out humanity on Earth, it'll only be a matter of time before outer space settlements also get wiped out due to a lack of resources getting implemented from Earth. Moreover, existential risks like artificial intelligence takeovers will not be limited to Earth and will take advantage of the vulnerability of outer space settlements to complete human extinction. This argument is simply illogical. First, it's like saying the United States is morally obligated to ship half its population to Antarctica to prevent Americans from going extinct. The risks are improbable, and the negative impacts completely outweigh the benefits. Also, they say to sustain the human species is an existential crisis, that it'll sustain a human species in an existential crisis, and there will be a need for millions of humans to be shipped to an outer space settlement, and that is simply not feasible within the next few centuries, as the most people in a single spacecraft launch till date is 8. How will we send millions without taking enormous resources and having a huge toll on our environment? This will essentially be forcing millions to put their lives in vulnerable conditions for the small possibility that there is an existential crisis. Moreover, they talk about worst case of this plan is policy failure. What about the millions, hundreds of thousands, or millions that are sent there to achieve the impacts that AF brings up, who will eventually be put in vulnerable scenarios where a mere power cut could wipe out the entire settlement? They also talk about how space development has numerous impacts and brings up a Hamilton card, but that is non-unique. As I said, space development has numerous advantages, and I agree, space development does, but just for those advantages to come to us doesn't require us to establish permanent settlements on another planet, making these settlements vulnerable. In their second contention, they talk about who bears the cost of resource use and talks about how outer space colonization expands access to resources outside of Earth. But that again doesn't require permanent settlements. They say the justification to why we need permanent settlements is mining can be tampered, so we need settlements to prevent that from being tampered. But the same risk exists with outer space colonization. All that app is doing is creating the idea that we are saving billions, when in reality, at most, and in the best case scenario, a few 100,000 of the elite wealthy, or maybe a million, will get to go to an outer space colonization. And under the disposable planet mentality that I say forms, it'll leave Earth vulnerable for the billions more. And they say the app says they value future generations, but says impacts on them shouldn't be considered. Thus, their framework shouldn't be considered either. Future generations are the fundamental part of their framework, and they say what happens to future generations on Earth don't matter from this round when they clearly do. Thus, Judge, I clearly and strongly negate the resolution.
Okay. Are you ready for cross examination?
Yeah.
Okay. Just a second. I'll just pull up my time. Yeah. Okay. I'll start uh, in three, two, one. Okay, so it's a simple yes or no question. Do you agree that if colonization would significantly reduce the probability of human extinction, then there is at least a strong moral reason to pursue it? Simple yes or no.
Well, I can't answer that question because it doesn't. As I proved in my speech, it doesn't solve human settlements. It
Okay,
doesn't. Sorry,
that's fine.
It doesn't provide protection from existential threats. It
Okay, if
doesn't
you do not
protect
okay, if
humanity.
you do not agree with that, I'm simply saying if it did, hypothetically, which in my side it does, would you still agree that there is a strong moral reason to pursue it? If it does, even if you don't
Well,
agree with it.
hypothetically, it won't. So there's no point in answering that question. I mean, it's a super. There is no answer to that question hypothetically. It either happens or it won't. And I have proved that it won't protect society, as existential threats will simply follow us. We build new infrastructure on our planet. We take infrastructure from Earth. We take minerals from Earth. The same existential threats that happen on the surface of Earth will continue to happen in outer space settlements. Simply putting more distance between Earth and an outer space settlement doesn't solve or protect human species.
Okay. So, okay. Do you believe that this is very general? Do you believe an insurance policy has to be guaranteed to pay out before purchasing it is rational?
Sorry, what?
Okay, this is like very general. Do you believe an insurance policy has to be guaranteed to pay out before purchasing it is rational?
Yes, there has to be clear terms and conditions that are there, which clearly outline what we're getting out in the event of an accident. While with outer space, see, in this scenario, it's completely different since we're sending our money basically into a fire. We're sending humans that are going into Mars, into vulnerable communities where they risk getting completely wiped out from the smallest issues that would have simply been inconveniences on Earth. So
Okay.
it's like throwing, it's like an insurance policy that says when you give your money, it's going to be put in a
Uh,
fire or put around hot material.
so, if an event makes Earth permanently uninhabitable, so do Earth based bunkers, governments, hospitals, food systems, and infrastructure remain available in that case?
So, firstly, neither do outer space colonies because they will still be dependent on Earth's infrastructure, still will be dependent on imports from Earth. But let's say they are a permanent settlement, the same catastrophe that could happen on the Earth's surface might not impact underwater habitats, might not impact underground settlements. They might not. That's the exact point of a nuclear bunker and those kind of
Yeah,
things that
okay, I'm sorry.
achieve the same thing as outer space colonies and outer space settlements do, but for
Okay, I'm sorry to
significantly
cut
less
you off.
cost and for clear benefits rather than sending millions to a vulnerable
Okay,
community,
okay. So
vulnerable settlement.
both of our definitions include the word self-sustaining. So in that case, if Earth becomes permanently uninhabitable, then why does a self-sustaining colony still rely on Earth for that case?
I'm saying that if it is not fully self-sustaining, it will, and even if it
Your
is
definition
self-sustaining,
included self-sustaining.
even if it is not self, even if it is self-sustaining, existential threats will follow it. As I say in my speech, the primary existential threats will continue to follow to a settlement on Mars or the moon or wherever it is. Yeah, that is time.
Let's cross. Okay. I have my rebuttal now, and I'll just like to take running prep before starting on with that, if that's fine. Okay, I'll start my time in three, two, one. Okay, that was a minute and 30 seconds of prep time. If everyone is ready for an off-time roadmap, I'll just be going over my opponent's case. Then I'll be defending my case, and if time permits, I'll get on to weighing. Um, if is everyone ready? Okay, cool. Then I'll start my time on the reverse countdown of three, two, one. Okay, Judge, before we touch a single contention, we need to fix the framework because NEG has spent this entire round changing the question. Their criterion is protect Earth, ours is justice through maximum behind a transgenerational veil of ignorance. Prefer ours for one reason. Their criterion arbitrarily privileges the people who happen to be alive today. Ours asks what is just for everyone affected by the decision, including people who have not yet been born and do not know whether they will be worst off. Behind that veil, you don't know whether you're a wealthy person on Earth, a cobalt miner, or a future human born after Earth suffers catastrophe. Justice, therefore, cannot mean protect the people currently on Earth at all costs. It means protecting the least advantaged across generations. And maximum is especially appropriate because the downside we identify is irreversible extinction. NEG asks you to accept permanent planetary dependence because their alternative is supposedly safer. But under maximum, when one option preserves the worst case of extinction and another creates a pathway to redundancy, you don't gamble humanity's existence merely because the safer option is more comfortable today. And here's the important part. Even if you grant next criterion, we still win. Protecting Earth and colonizing space are non mutually exclusive. Our case never says abandon Earth. It says protect Earth and eliminate Earth status as humanity's single point of failure. Now, on their first contention on how colonization makes Earth disposable, that is a complete logical inversion. They say creating a second home makes us care less about the first. They provide no warrant for that causal leap. A backup does not make you destroy the original. Insurance doesn't make you burn down your house. In fact, the entire affirmative explicitly defends a governed phase transition, not abandoning Earth. And their lifeboat, for a few analogy, actually proves our point. A lifeboat does not become worthless because everyone cannot fit on it. Its purpose is to prevent the shipwreck from becoming the death of everyone. They demand that colonization immediately protect billions before they will recognize any moral value in it. That's fabricated threshold nowhere in the resolution. Second, on the least dangerous path, their argument concedes our premise. They agree existential survival matters. Their only response is that maybe something else is safer, but their alternatives, bunkers, underwater habitats, hardened infrastructure, remain on Earth. They diversify locations, not planets. They do nothing against a catastrophe that makes Earth's entire biosphere or long-term habitability untenable. And Jonas's precautionary principle cuts both ways. If uncertainty requires caution, then we should only be cautious about both possible futures, the risk of colonization and the risk of never colonizing. Third, on that colonization creates vulnerability. That is another false comparison. Temporary dependence is not permanent dependence. The point to the vulnerability of an early settlement and pretend this describes the endpoint of colonization, but our definition requires autonomous self-sufficient habitation. This is a definition both sides have offered. An early stage settlement requires supplies from Earth is precisely what the affirmative says is not yet colonization. And now the biggest conception. They say that we are only saving millions instead of billions. No, we never claim that every future human must physically relocate into space. That is not our impact. Our impact is civilizational redundancy. If one independent population exists elsewhere, Earth can no longer be the single location whose destruction means human extinction. They keep asking how many people get to go. The answer is enough to establish an autonomous civilization. There is no magic percentage at which justice suddenly begins. A backup does not have to contain the majority of the original system to have value. And under our framework, that matters enormously. Behind the veil, you don't know whether you'll be among the millions remaining on Earth or among the future generation whose survival depends on humanity having diversified. Now, let's go back to our case and defend our affirmative. Contention one: we never claim colonization guarantees survival. We claim it reduces the possibility of an irreversible extinction by creating independence on Earth. It might fail as uncertainty, not return. Under maximum uncertainty surrounding catastrophe is precisely why we avoid having only one option. On contention two, NEC fundamentally misunderstands it. We are not saying space has minerals there for Mars. We are saying the current extraction system disproportionately burdens vulnerable populations, while a phase treaty governed of world regime can displace the worst exploitation under a commons framework. Their response is that we can mine asteroids without colonization doesn't answer the warrant. Let's go on to weighing a bit. NEC gives you one planet and the hope that every existential catastrophe can be prevented. However, we give you Earth protection plus redundancy. Under their criterion, ours protects human welfare by reducing catastrophic vulnerability, and under ours, we protect the worst of person across generations rather than privileging whoever happens to be alive today. And on the decisive question, what happens if Earth fails, NEC has no answer. They ask you to trust the Earth that will always be enough. That is justice under maximum. For those reasons, I strongly urge an affirmative ballot. Thank you.
Okay. I have 2 minutes and 30 seconds of prep time if I'm correct. So I'll start that prep time when I All right, that's done. Just to give a quick off time roadmap, I'll be starting with my case, sorry, with framework, then I'll be going to their case, then I'll be defending my own case, and I will be weighing. If everyone's ready, I can begin now. All right. My time starts in 3, 2, 1. Let's start with the ASP framework. They say my framework only values the current, but protecting Earth benefits all. Extend my Aldo Leopold's curve, which holds that our actions are only morally right when they preserve the integrity and stability of the community that sustains us. This was a conceded philosophy, which is why my framework is conceded. Moreover, there would be no human survival without the Earth to sustain it. So the protection of our planet completely outweighs their framework of justice. Next, they say we shouldn't gamble humanity, but sending humanity to Mars, sending communities to Mars or other outer space colonization is gambling humanity. We are counting on the fact that they will survive and infrastructure will be enough without act. But what we're realistically doing is sending people to a vulnerable community that won't safely protect them. They next say that the backup doesn't go against the original, but extend my disposable planet mentality and my Martin Rees card, which were both clean conceded, cold conceded, which say that when you introduce an escape plan through outer space colonization, it creates a dangerous delusion which erodes our incentives to protect the Earth, creating the disposable planet mentality where everyone views the Earth as not something that we need to sustain, but something that we can leave the moment problems come to it. This leads to Earth getting significantly destroyed and the impacts on Earth, climate change and other problems worsening. They cannot justify a simple estimate of the amount of people that will need to go, saying enough people need to go, but millions aren't going to get sent to die since millions aren't getting sent. If even a mere million aren't getting sent, how will this sustain human civilization? A few hundred or a few thousand won't sustain human civilization and won't be enough to sustain human civilization, even if Mars survives an existential threat. They say that my alternatives on Earth don't protect human civilization, but neither do their alternatives on Mars. They have failed to respond to how, in the case of a threat of that scale, outer space colonies will not be able to survive either. Moving to my case, they have completely cold conceded my first contention of outer space colonization undermines our responsibility to protect Earth, backed by the Martin Rees and disposable planet mentality points. They have completely also cold conceded my second contention. This round is over. They have conceded 2 out of my 3 contentions. My second contention says the least dangerous path must be pursued and is backed by the Hans Jonas card, so extended, which says we are morally obligated to take the path that avoids irreversible risks. Their path leads to irreversible risks where you're sending communities to vulnerable places where they will easily get wiped out by the smallest issues. There are better alternatives, which I have extended and justified through the rebuttals I have extended, which means that as we have better and safer path, we are morally obligated to take that path, meaning even if outer space colonization is beneficial or might be beneficial, it is not a moral imperative as there is a safer path. And next, about how outer space colonization creates new vulnerability, they fail to accept that sending human, their simple response is millions aren't getting sent. Irrelevant of whether millions are getting sent or thousands are getting sent, you're still sending people to die. They haven't properly rebutted this contention as you're still sending people to put their lives on risk just for the sake of backup, when by only sending a few thousand or few hundred thousand, you're not actually preserving humanity. Let's move to Wing. Actually, first, they talk about existential risk and how about outer space colonization prevents existential risk. But look at all of the possible existential risks. If we talk about asteroids, Earth has already, through the double asteroid redirection test by NASA, deliberately struck the asteroid Dimorphos on 26 September 2022, shortening its orbit by 32 minutes. And this intentionally altered the celestial's body into motion, reducing existential risk reduction from Earth. We don't need outer space colonization to stop that. If we're talking about artificial intelligence takeovers, which are one of the most probable reasons, that will follow us to Mars as we are still taking infrastructure and technology to Mars. If they talk about a nuclear disaster, the same will happen in outer space colonies. None of the existential risks that they say will be prevented on Mars, and numerous of these existential risks can be prevented from Earth. Judge, because Lincoln Douglas is fundamentally a philosophical debate over what principles should guide human decisions, my first voting issue is philosophy. AF gives you empirical claims about what colonization could accomplish, but provides no philosophical foundation for why those benefits should determine what humanity ought to do, meaning their moral arguments aren't justified. Extend my Aldo Leopold's card on action only being morally right if they preserve the stability of the community that supports us, my Martin Rees card on the disposable planet mentality, my Hans Jonas card on our moral obligation to take the path that avoids irreversible risk, and my numerous other physical arguments philosophical arguments that were all cold conceded. These philosophies all justify that outer space colonization is a moral imperative, while AF lacks that justification. My second voting issue of moral imperative requiring necessity, the most important distinction in this round, which I explain in my definitions, is that we are not discussing whether space colonization is good or bad, but whether it's morally necessary. And in this round, AF has failed to do so. As said in my disposable planet mentality card, it outlines that space colonization will amplify ongoing problems in our planet, and by removing the incentives that we have for helping Earth, as explained earlier, this escape plan may seem good on paper, but in reality, even as NEG said themselves, they won't even send 1 million people, which means 8.299999 out of the 8.3 billion people on Earth will still be left on Earth. So this escape plan to escape Earth's problems will only backfire by making Earth more vulnerable for the many that stay. And let's go to their framework. They say we should protect the least advantaged communities, but that is a complete lie. Outer space colonization will not protect the least advantaged communities. It'll, as she said herself, the millions will not be sent. It'll be in the thousands or hundreds of thousands, and that'll be limited to the elite rich. Extend my Hans Jonas card, which explains that we are morally obligated. So we win on their framework as well. And my Hans Jonas card outlines that we are morally obligated to take the safer path. Under my framework, even if we look at the magnitude of impacts, Ask's world of outer space colonization will only save thousands or hundreds of thousands, while mine saves millions, and mine saves the 8 billion people on Earth who require Earth. I've successfully rebutted all of their points and extended all of my own, so don't let us use their last speech to claim otherwise or bring up new rebuttals, as I don't get a chance to respond. Thus, I've never been prouder to negate the resolution.
Okay. Thank you for your speech. I believe I took 1 minute and 30 seconds of prep time before my first rebuttal, and that means I have 2 minutes and 30 seconds left, which I'd like to utilize before my other rebuttal, if that's okay. Okay, cool. I'll start my prep time in three, two. Okay, that was 2 minutes 30 seconds. Judges, enough time roadmap. I'll just be going over the framework, the main clashes in this debate, and then I'll be weighing in the ending. Is everyone ready? Perfect. I'll start time in three, two, one. Judges first saying they conceded does not make something actually conceded. A concession requires an argument to go unanswered. We answered their framework in every major contention. Meanwhile, they repeatedly ignore arguments we actually made. So let's separate that rhetoric from what is actually on the floor. First, let's go on to framework because it comes first because this is LD. Their criterion says protect the earth that sustains us, but they assume the very thing our case challenges, that earth will always remain capable of sustaining humanity. Our justice maximum framework is superior because it is impartial across generations. Behind the veil, I don't know whether I'm born today, a cobalt miner in the DRC, or a person in a future generation facing extinction. Their framework privileges the existing planetary community. Our protects the worst of person, regardless of when they are born. That is exactly what justice requires. And even if you prefer their framework, which you shouldn't, we still win. If their goal is human welfare and Earth's continued ability to sustain humanity, then making humanity less dependent on a single planetary system advances that goal. They never established that protecting Earth requires refusing to create a backup. Earth protection and planetary redundancy are complementary, not contradictory. Now let's go on to their first contention on disposable planet mentality, which again we responded to in our rebuttal. They claim colonization reduces our incentive to protect Earth, but where is the logical link? Our case explicitly says protect Earth while building redundancy. A backup does not make the original disposable. More importantly, they never answer our uniqueness. Earth-based risks can affect everyone simultaneously. Their contention therefore asks you to prefer greater concentration of risk simply because diversification might psychologically change incentives. Next on their Hans Jonas and the least dangerous path. Their entire argument assumes colonization is a dangerous option while treating Earth as a safe alternative. But Earth has an irreversible worst case, extinction. Their underground habitats, underwater facilities, and infrastructure remain on the same planet. They may diversify locations, but the safer option is not the one with fewer short-term engineering problems. It is the one that reduces the catastrophic worst case. Third, on vulnerability. Yes, early settlements will be vulnerable, but that does not prove colonization is immoral. Their own argument confuses difficulty of establishing self-sufficiency with impossibility of achieving it. Now let's go back to our case and look at what they actually dropped. Our entire second contention. They never answered the cobalt exploitation link, the phase transition, commons governance, or our maximum application to the world's worst off. We don't claim space mining magically fixes inequality. We argued for a governed phase substitution that reduces the worst terrestrial extraction while preventing economic collapse. That entire mechanism remains standard because, Judge, they did not respond to it even once. Now, on the biggest slash on how only millions or thousands can go, this misunderstands the case. We never claimed colonization as an evacuation plan for 8.3 billion people. It is an intergenerational redundancy. The question is whether humanity can establish an independent branch capable of preserving civilization across future generations, not whether we can instantly transport everyone alive today. Under maximum, we saying we cannot save everyone immediately, therefore save nobody is backwards. Finally, they keep saying we prove benefit rather than obligation. We did not. Our obligation comes from the framework. If rational parties behind the veil must protect the worst of against an irreversible catastrophic outcome, it is required by justice. Let's weigh this around. Philosophy, our framework protects people impartially across generations. Magnitude, their harms are finite and speculative. Our worst case is extinction and the loss of future generations. Probability, they never prove earth-based alternatives eliminate existential risks. They only prove they can reduce individual risks. And lastly, on reversibility, their harms are potentially correctable. Extinction is not. For those reasons, I strongly urge an affirmative ballot. Thank you. Good debate. Thank you so much,
Yep. Thanks, you
judges.
judges. Thank you, judges, and thank you,
Nice talking.
Janya. This was a fun debate.
Great
Yeah.
job, everyone.